don't have much time to read books, want to make the most of your commute, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to the What's It About channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Let's get started.
So today we're tackling something that isn't. Well, it's not just a novel. I'd argue we're looking at a fracture, a real crack in the timeline of an entire nation's culture.
A fracture. That's a huge way to start.
It really is. We're talking about a book that, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, basically divided Turkish cultural history into before and after.
Wow. Okay. Usually when we hear phrases like definitive rupture, we're talking about, a war or a major coup, maybe a massive economic crash. But we're talking about a book, a paperback book.
A single paperback book that was banned, that was publicly burned, dragged through the court system for years, and then eventually legally exonerated.
Okay, now I'm hooked. What is it?
We're diving into Kadının Adı Yok, which translates from Turkish to Woman Has No Name. It was published in 1987 by the journalist and writer Duygu Asena.
Woman Has No Name. And I'm guessing that title isn't just like a poetic metaphor.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that hits you, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the core mystery of the whole thing.
It's the absolute defining feature of the entire text. I mean, think about it. You spend hundreds of pages completely inside this protagonist's head. You know her childhood fears, her first sexual awakenings, all her frustrations with her father, the deepest disappointments with her husband.
You know her inside and out.
Better than you know your own neighbors, probably. But you never, not for a single moment, learn her name.
That is such an incredibly bold choice, just from a technical writing perspective.
Right.
I mean, imagine trying to write that, navigating dialogue and descriptions without ever, slipping up and naming her.
It's a huge challenge. But it's so much more than a writing gimmick, isn't it? It's the entire message.
So let's break that down. Why do it? What's the statement there?
It's a really profound semiotic statement. Think about how we introduce people, especially in the context of, say, 1980s Turkey. But let's be honest, it's true in most patriarchal societies. A woman is first introduced as someone's daughter.
Right. This is Mr. Smith's daughter.
Then, if she follows the script, she becomes someone's wife. This is John's wife. And after that, hopefully, she becomes someone's mother. Her identity is always, always relational. It's tethered to a man.
So by withholding the name, Asena is essentially taking a pair of scissors and just snipping those tethers.
Exactly. That's a perfect way to put it. She is stripping away all the identifiers that society uses to categorize and control women. Because think about it, if the protagonists were named Aishus or Fatma or Jane, the reader could create distance.
Oh, for sure. You'd say, oh, that's a sad story about poor Aisha. Her husband's a real jerk. Thank goodness my life isn't like that. It becomes specific.
It becomes a specific tragedy about a specific person. But when there's no name,
She could be anyone.
she becomes the everywoman. She becomes a mirror. You, the reader, are forced to project your own experiences, your own mother's experiences, your sister's, onto this blank canvas. The book stops being the biography of a fictional character, and it transforms into a manifesto for a collective condition.
And that manifesto, that mirror, clearly touched a raw nerve. I definitely want to dig into the backlash, the banning, all of that, because it sounds intense.
Oh, it was.
But first, you're right. We have to set the stage. You can't possibly understand why this book was such a bombshell without understanding the ground it landed on.
Absolutely. To get this, we need to go back to the 1980s, and specifically to the really unique sort of suffocating atmosphere of post-1980 Turkey.
And this is a period that is completely defined by the military coup of September 12, 1980.
Correct. And we have to be careful not to just gloss over what that really meant, what it felt like on a street level. Before 1980, Turkey was incredibly loud, politically loud. You had this intensely polarized struggle playing out everywhere between the traditional left and the traditional right. Students were marching, unions were on strike, the streets were full of slogans and posters and debates.
It sounds chaotic, and I know it's sometimes violent, but it was politically alive, right?
Exactly. And then the coup happens, and just silence. The military government didn't just seize power, they completely dismantled the entire political arena. They crushed the unions, they shut down the student organizations, they banned political parties. They effectively depoliticized the entire society almost overnight.
So you're left with a vacuum. A huge silent space where politics used to be.
A massive sociological vacuum.
Yeah.
You have this whole generation of intellectuals, writers, and thinkers who can no longer talk about class struggle or nationalism in the same way they used to. The public square is closed for business. The microphone has been switched off.
And that energy has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Physics tells us that, right? Energy doesn't just disappear.
It went inward. It turned from the public to the private sphere. Because the state had clamped down so hard on public politics, people started looking at the politics of the home, the politics of the bedroom, the politics of the family dinner table.
The personal is political. That's a phrase that comes to mind.
That became the unspoken rallying cry. This is the exact soil where Turkish second-wave feminism really took root and blossomed. It wasn't about asking for the vote. I mean, Turkish women had already attained suffrage back in the 1930s, way ahead of many European nations.
Right. This wasn't about those big top-down legal rights.
No, this new movement was about the bottom-up reality. It was about things like domestic violence, which was considered a private family matter. It was about bodily autonomy, about abortion. It was about the immense psychological weight of honor.
That's such a critical distinction. You can have the legal right to vote, but if you don't have the right to speak freely at your own dinner table, are you actually free?
That is precisely the question Duygu Asena was asking. And what's so fascinating is that she was the perfect person to ask it because her own life was this perfect mirror of that national contradiction.
Okay, so let's get into her background. Because she wasn't some radical outsider throwing rocks at the system. She came from the very heart of the establishment, from the elite.
She absolutely did. She was born in Istanbul in 1946. And if you look at her family tree, you can almost see the history of the Turkish Republic arguing with itself. It's fascinating.
On one side of that argument, you have her grandfather.
Ali Şevket Undersef. I mean, this guy was an associate of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the Republic. He was a member of parliament. He represented everything about that secular, Western-facing, reformist modernization project. He was the public face of progress.
The public face that says to the world, look at us, we are a modern nation. Our women are liberated citizens with full rights.
Exactly. But then you have her father, Muhtar Asena. He was a wealthy sesame merchant, and by all accounts, he was a man of the old world. He was authoritarian, conservative, deeply controlling.
So you have this insane duality. The grandfather represents the law, which says on paper that women are equal, but the father represents the culture, which in practice says, sit down, be quiet, and do as you're told.
And that tension is what defined Asena's entire life and work. She saw firsthand that the Republic could grant you rights on paper, but the father, both her literal father and the larger metaphorical patriarchal father of society, could just snatch them away the moment you walk through your own front door.
That hypocrisy must have been just maddening to grow up in. To be told you're a citizen of this modern progressive republic, but to be living under what's essentially a domestic dictatorship.
It creates a kind of split consciousness, right? And Asena actually spent her early career trying to understand that split from a scientific perspective. This is a detail people often miss. Before she wrote the book, she wasn't just a writer, she was a pedagogue.
A pedagogue.
Yeah, she studied pedagogy at Istanbul University, and then she worked at the Haseki Hospital's child clinic.
So she had a clinical background in child development. That's a huge piece of the puzzle.
It's crucial. She spent years observing how children are shaped, how they are molded. She saw with her own eyes how social conditioning works from day one. She saw that gender isn't just something you're born with. It's a role you are bullied and trained into performing.
And eventually she takes that clinical observation and brings it into the public sphere, into the media. She becomes the editor-in-chief of Kadının magazine in 1978.
And we really cannot overstate the importance of Kadınca. In the late 70s and early 80s, women's magazines in Turkey were essentially just instruction manuals for being a good housewife.
Right. I'm picturing recipes, knitting patterns.
And articles on how to remove stubborn stains from your husband's shirts. That was the level of it.
And Asena walks in and just flips the table. It says, this is boring. Let's talk about real life.
She turned it completely upside down. Under her editorship, Kadınca started putting the most taboo topics imaginable on its cover. They started writing about female sexuality, not as something shameful to be hidden, but as a biological and psychological reality. They wrote about abortion. They wrote about workplace harassment years before we had the common vocabulary for things like a hostile work environment.
Wow. That must have been so shocking to see on a newsstand next to the traditional daily papers.
It was utterly revolutionary, and what it proved, what it showed the entire publishing industry, was that they were wrong. There was a massive, untapped audience of women who were starving for this content. They didn't just want tips on cooking. They wanted to understand why they felt so trapped and unhappy. Kadınca basically created the vocabulary that Asena would later use to write Woman Has No Name.
So she has the clinical background from pedagogy, she has the journalistic platform with the magazine, and she has this deeply personal history of contradiction. The fuse is lit.
Fuse is lit, and in 1987, she drops the bomb.
Okay, so let's walk through the architecture of the book itself. You mentioned it follows her from childhood.
It does. It starts, very appropriately, in what I like to call the domestic panopticon.
A panopticon, that's a powerful word. It brings to mind this idea of a prison where the prisoners are constantly being watched, but they can't see the watcher.
That is exactly the feeling Asena depicts in the middle-class family home. It's important to note, it's not a horror movie in the sense of constant physical beatings or gore. It's a clean oppression. It's an invisible, suffocating hierarchy where everyone knows their place, and they know it without ever being told explicitly.
And that place is determined from day one by your gender.
Immediately. The very first thing the protagonist notices is the vast difference between her life and her brother's life. The girls are taught this very specific set of behaviors. They are taught to speak usul, which means softly, quietly, without drawing any attention to yourself. They are taught not to laugh too loudly. They have to serve the food to their brother first. They eat after he does.
It's basically training for invisibility. Step-by-step instructions on how to take up less space in the world.
Precisely. And at the exact same time her brother is being trained for dominance, he learns that his comfort is the absolute priority of every woman in the house. Asena writes that the protagonist realizes this very early on, she says. Being a male is a privilege. It's not just a biological difference, it's a fundamental class difference within the four walls of your own home.
And the parents are the wardens of this prison, the enforcers of this class system. We've talked about the authoritarian father. But what about the mother? You would hope, that she would be an ally.
And that's the real tragedy of it. The mother figure in this book is presented as a cautionary tale. She has so completely internalized the oppression that she now helps enforce it. She is deeply unhappy, she's in an abusive marriage, but she stays. And the book asks why.
And the answer is?
Because she has no economic power. She has absolutely nowhere else to go. Her submission has bought her a cage, not safety.
She's a ghost in her own home, a warning of what's to come.
She represents the future that awaits the protagonist if she just follows the rules. The mother is the living, breathing evidence that submission doesn't buy you happiness or safety. It only buys you a slow, quiet erasure.
So our protagonist looks at her mother and thinks, nope, I'm not doing that. She decides she needs an escape plan. And like a lot of bright young women in that era, and even today, she sees university as the escape hatch.
This is what brings us to the next phase of her life, which Asena portrays as a kind of belated adolescence. She fights tooth and nail to get into university. She sees it as the one and only path to economic independence, an act of rebellion. And intellectually, she is blossoming. She's reading philosophy, she's debating ideas, she's becoming a modern individual in her mind.
But she's still living at home, under the father's roof.
And that's the central conflict. Her mind is expanding to the 20th century, but her curfew is stuck in the 19th. She's reading existential philosophy by day and then coming home to a father who checks her arrival time to the minute and questions where she's been.
It's a completely unsustainable situation. She has to leave the house.
Yeah.
But in that culture, you don't just, move out and get an apartment with your friends. You leave your father's house to go to.
Your husband's house. And this is the great trap of the book. She decides to marry a man named Gherkin.
Okay, let's unpack Gherkin. Because he's such a fascinating villain. He's not this mustache-twirling bad guy.
Yeah.
Right, he's not her father. He seems different.
No, and that's precisely why he's so dangerous. Gherkin seems modern. He drinks whiskey, he wears fashionable suits, he goes to sophisticated parties, he speaks well. To the protagonist, he looks like freedom personified. She thinks, okay, this man is different. With him, I can finally be an equal.
She's marrying him not just for love, but to escape her father. But she finds out pretty quickly that the cage just has different, more modern-looking furniture.
She walks right into what Asena illustrates as the vitrin trap. Vitrin is the Turkish word for a shop window or a display case.
Oh, that's a brilliant metaphor.
It's perfect, isn't it? Gherkin doesn't want a partner. He wants an accessory. He views his beautiful, educated wife as an object that enhances his own status. Having her on his arm makes him look successful and modern to his peers.
It's the trophy wife syndrome, but it sounds like it's even deeper than that. It's about being a prop in someone else's movie.
That's it, exactly. He doesn't view her as a subject, or a person with her own agency, her own desires, her own inner world. He views her as an extension of himself. And because he operates from the assumption that he is the rational man and she's the emotional woman, he assumes total control over her life, but he does it with a smile.
The psychological violence that Asena describes here must be so insidious. It's that constant, condescending, I know what's best for you attitude.
It's gaslighting before we all had that word in our vocabulary. He manages the world. She is expected to manage the house. And her own identity, her own name, in a sense, is slowly cannibalized by these two all-consuming roles, mother and wife.
And let's not forget the sheer labor aspect of that. The housework, the child rearing, it all falls 100% on her shoulders, right?
Yeah.
Even though they're both supposed to be these modern people.
Of course, that's the classic double burden. She's educated, she has ambitions, but the moment their first child arrives, her world shrinks down to the size of a nursery. She asks this absolutely desperate question in the text, she says, does becoming a mother mean being swallowed whole?
Wow, that hits hard.
And the society around her, her husband, everyone answers with a resounding yes. A good mother is a self-sacrificing mother. A good mother is a silent mother. If you have ambitions or desires outside of your child, you are seen as selfish, as unnatural.
I can imagine this section of the book is where the every woman aspect just exploded for readers. Imagine you're a woman in Turkey in 1987 sitting in your kitchen feeling this immense guilt because you want to read a book for an hour instead of doing the laundry.
Right.
And then you read this, you realize, wait a minute, I'm not crazy. The game is rigged.
It was a moment of mass recognition. I think millions of women read that and realized they were living inside the vitrine, inside that display case.
But that kind of recognition is painful. And for the protagonist, the situation becomes completely unbearable. Gherkin isn't just controlling, he's also unfaithful.
Yes, he cheats on her. But notice how Asena writes this. The pain she feels isn't just about the sex or the jealousy, it's about the profound sense of devaluation. It's the cold, hard realization that she is replaceable. She is an object that has lost its initial shine, so he's simply looking for a new one.
And this betrayal is what finally pushes her to commit the most radical act in the entire book. She asks for a divorce.
And we have to pause here and really absorb what that meant. Today, in 2024, divorce is difficult, it's painful, but it's common. In 1980s Turkey, for a middle-class woman with a child to initiate a divorce, it was a social death sentence.
You're basically branding yourself with a scarlet letter.
Completely. Asena describes the social stigma so vividly. A divorced woman, a dull woman, is viewed as dangerous. She's seen as available prey for single men because she's no longer pure, but she's also seen as a terrifying threat by married women because she might steal their husbands.
She becomes this rogue element. She doesn't fit into the neat box of daughter or wife, so society just doesn't know what to do with her.
But she does it anyway. And this is where the story pivots so powerfully to the absolute necessity of economic independence. Asena is crystal clear on this point. You cannot be a feminist if you cannot pay your own rent.
Money is freedom. It's that simple.
Economic autonomy is the absolute prerequisite for feminist consciousness.
Yeah.
The protagonist finally enters the workforce. And Asena, to her credit, doesn't sugarcoat this part either. The workplace isn't some feminist utopia that magically solves all her problems.
No, sexism just changes its clothes. Instead of a husband telling you what to do, now it's a boss and male colleagues.
Exactly. She faces male colleagues who constantly dismiss her abilities. They use these tired, old biological myths to exclude her. They make jokes about her being on her period. Oh, she's just being emotional today. It must be that time of the month. They claim women are inherently unstable or unfit for serious responsibility.
It's the same pattern of control, just professionalized and put in an office setting.
But, and this is the absolute key to her awakening, she has her own money. And that money buys her space. It buys her the right to be a subject in her own life, not an object in someone else's.
Now, there's a subplot in the book that I found absolutely fascinating because it zooms out from this personal domestic sphere and takes a hard look at the state itself. We have to talk about the judge.
Ah, yes. Fake or fan Elvrir. This is such a crucial, if somewhat dark and chilling subplot. The protagonist has some interactions with this judge who is presiding over a very famous case at the time, the Yala murder case.
And this guy is, well, he's a complete nightmare, isn't he?
Yeah. He is the living, breathing embodiment of institutional misogyny. Through the narrative, we learn that his own wife has been unfaithful to him. He is just consumed by this private rage and humiliation. But instead of dealing with that in his own life, he projects it onto his job.
So he takes out his anger at his wife on the women who appear in his courtroom.
Precisely. He projects his personal vendetta onto every single female defendant he sees. He isn't judging them based on the penal code or the evidence. He is judging them based on his own festering wound, his own anger against the female gender as a whole.
That is absolutely terrifying. Because he's not just some random guy. He represents the law. He represents the state wearing a robe.
And that is Asena's brilliant point. Patriarchy isn't just a problem of bad husbands or overly strict fathers. It is baked into the very machinery of the state. The legal system itself functions as a form of moral policing. The judge views all women with this inherent suspicion. To him, a woman is guilty until proven innocent, simply by virtue of being a woman.
And this is where the story gets so meta, it's almost unbelievable. Because the book, this fictional story about a woman struggling for identity against patriarchal forces, was published. It became a massive bestseller, and then the real state stepped in and acted exactly like the judge in the book.
It is a perfect case of life imitating art in the most absurd and validating way. In 1988, just a year after it was published, the Board for the Protection of Minors from Obscene Publications officially banned Woman Has No Name.
Okay, let's look at the official charge. They claimed it was obscene and harmful to the morals of children and the family structure.
Which is just deeply, deeply ironic. If you actually read the book, as millions had, there is no graphic sexuality. This is not 50 Shades of Grey. There are no pornographic scenes to point to.
So what on earth was obscene about it? What were they so afraid of?
The autonomy. That was the obscenity. Asena argued this brilliantly in her own defense. She said the obscenity wasn't in her writing, it was in the society she was describing. She was writing about a woman who dared to claim ownership of her own body, her own choices, and her own life.
And to the board, a woman speaking honestly about her own rights was seen as a direct threat to the family structure.
Exactly. They were effectively equating family structure with female silence. The logic was, if a woman speaks up about her unhappiness, the family crumbles. Therefore, the book itself is harmful. The state was literally acting like the father in the book, trying to silence the daughter to protect the so-called honor of the house.
But unlike the women of her mother's generation, Asena didn't just accept the ban and go quietly. She fought back. Hard.
She went to war in the courts. It was this long, grueling, and expensive legal battle that lasted for 3 full years. But in 1991, she won. The court overturned the ban and ruled that the book was, in fact, a work of literature protected under freedom of expression.
That victory must have been huge. It wasn't just about selling more copies of her book, was it?
Oh, it was a landmark case. It established a vital legal precedent. It meant that this vague catch-all concept of protecting the family structure could no longer be used as a blanket excuse to silence women's lived experiences. It was a massive victory for freedom of expression and specifically for women's rights to tell their own stories.
And while all this high-stakes legal drama was unfolding, the book was capturing the popular imagination in other ways, too. It was adapted into a film in 1988, right in the middle of all this.
Yes, directed by the great Atuf Yilmaz, who was already famous for making these really powerful, woman-centered films. Hale Swegazi played the lead. It was a major production, a big deal at the time.
But, and there always seems to be a but, when it comes to book-to-film adaptations, there was one massive fundamental change they made that kind of undermines the entire philosophy of the book.
The naming. You've hit on it.
They gave her a name. How could they do that?
In the film, the protagonist is named Ishuk, which ironically means light.
I mean, I get it from a filmmaking perspective. It's probably hard to make a movie where no one can call the main character anything. Hey, you, would get old fast. But still, it feels like a betrayal of the core concept.
It completely dilutes the power of the work. As we've been discussing, the book works its magic because she is the every woman. By naming her Ishuk, the film immediately turns her into a specific individual. She becomes Ishuk, this particular woman with these particular marriage problems, rather than woman, the universal symbol.
It takes a structural critique of society and turns it back into a personal drama.
Precisely. And there's another, more subtle layer to this problem. The medium of film itself changes the perspective. In the book, we are inside her head. We are privy to her internal monologue. We see the entire world through her eyes.
Whereas in the movie, we are, by definition, looking at her.
The camera inherently objectifies. We are watching Hale Swegazi, who is a very famous and beautiful actress, navigate these scenes. The male gaze of the camera is almost impossible to avoid. The film, as a result, focuses much more on the external drama, the fights with the husband, the affair, whereas the novel is this intense internal psychological journey. The film just struggles to capture that internal individualization that the book achieves so brilliantly.
So despite the ban, despite the movie changing the name, the book's legacy is just undeniable. But I was really surprised to learn that the literary elite, the critics at the time, kind of turned their noses up at it.
Oh, the critics were absolutely brutal. They were very, very snobby about it. They said the writing was too simple, too straightforward. They called it didactic, like it was a lecture. They would compare Asena to more established high literary writers like Adele Aolu and basically say, this isn't real art. This is just complaining.
But they were completely missing the point, weren't they? The simplicity was the entire weapon.
100%. Asena wasn't trying to write a complex modernist novel to impress the literature professors at Istanbul University. She was practicing what we could call popular feminism. She used plain, flowing language. The Turkish phrase is "sayveye kanchido," specifically because she wanted to reach the masses.
She wanted the woman who didn't finish high school, the woman working in a factory, to be able to pick it up and say, my God, that's me, that's my life.
And she succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. She gave millions of women a language to describe their own oppression. Before this book, a woman might feel this deep, gnawing misery, but think it was her own personal failure, that she was somehow broken. After reading this book, she had concepts, if not the exact words, for things like invisible hierarchy and the domestic panopticon. Asena democratized feminism in Turkey.
And that massive cultural shift actually translated into real-world legal changes. We mentioned the civil code earlier. Can we get specific about what actually changed, partly because of the conversation this book started?
The impact was absolutely tangible. The huge public conversation that was started by the book and by her magazine Kadınca helped build the political pressure needed to remove a specific, incredibly archaic article in the Turkish civil code.
Which article was that?
It was the law that required a husband's explicit written permission for his wife to get a job.
Wait, let's just pause on that for a second. You literally needed a permission slip from your husband to go to work.
Literally. Imagine this. You're a grown woman, you're educated, you go to a job interview, you ace it, they offer you the job. But before you can sign the contract, you have to go home and ask your husband to sign a piece of paper granting you his permission, as if you were a child asking to go on a school field trip. And if he said no, the state backed him up. You could not legally work.
That is just, it's insane. It completely infantilizes half the population.
And that law was scrapped. And the momentum from that era, the awakening that Asena helped spark, it continued for decades. We can honestly trace a direct line from her struggle to very, very recent history.
You mean like the surname battle?
Exactly like the surname battle. For decades, Turkish women were legally required to take their husband's surname upon marriage. They were eventually allowed to keep their maiden name in front of his with a hyphen, but they couldn't just keep their own name, their own identity, alone.
The struggle for a name, it comes completely full circle.
Doesn't it just? And in 2023, just last year, the Turkish Constitutional Court finally invalidated that requirement. That decision stands on the shoulders of the women who fought these battles in the 80s and 90s. It is the long, clear echo of woman has no name.
Asena didn't just stop with one book, though. I understand she wrote a sequel with a title that is, if possible, just as provocative.
She did. It's called Aslında Aşkı Yok, which translates to actually love doesn't exist either.
Ouch. Okay, that sounds really bleak. Was she just completely bitter and cynical by that point?
It sounds cynical on the surface, but it's actually a much deeper philosophical stance. She isn't saying that human connection or affection or partnership doesn't exist. She is saying that love, as it has been defined by patriarchy, a love that is based on ownership, on dependence, on jealousy, and on female submission, is a lie. It's a sham. That isn't love. It's a hostage situation with better marketing.
So she's not destroying love, she's redefining it. She's saying that real, true love requires equality as a baseline.
That's the core of it. Until you are two free and equal subjects, love is just a pretty word for control. You cannot truly love someone you own, and you cannot truly love someone who owns you.
So how does the original book, Woman Has No Name, and we've gone through the suffocating childhood, the disappointing marriage, the divorce, the struggle at work, does she, ride off into the sunset with a new, better man?
No, absolutely not. And that is the most radical and important part of the entire book. It's not a romance novel. She doesn't find the perfect man who comes along and saves her. She saves herself.
It ends with her consciousness, their awakening.
It ends with her standing on her own 2 feet, looking at the world with clear eyes for the first time. She is aware. She is awake. The final message is that women are not born invisible, they are made invisible. But the name, your own name, it exists if you dare to claim it and say it out loud. The happy ending isn't a wedding, it's autonomy.
That is such a powerful and enduring message. It completely shifts the goalpost of a woman's life from finding a partner to finding yourself.
And that wake-up call rang out across Turkey in 1987, and I think it's still ringing today.
So let's bring it back to today then. We've talked about the 80s, the laws that have changed, the history. What does this book mean for us right here, right now?
Well, it leaves us with a really provocative question, I think.
Okay, lay it on me.
If Duygu Asena were to write this protagonist today, 40 years later, would she finally have a name?
Wow. That really stops you in your tracks, doesn't it?
Legally, of course, she has more rights. She doesn't need that permission slip to work. She can keep her own surname. The legal framework is better. But are there still invisible hierarchies at play?
Maybe not written into the civil code anymore, but baked into the culture.
Exactly. Look at our workplaces. Look at the persistence of the glass ceiling and the gender pay gap. Look at the immense pressure on supermoms who are expected to have a full-time, high-powered career and be the primary, perfect parent, effectively doing 2 full-time jobs while their partner does 1.
The domestic panopticon has just gone digital, hasn't it? Now we have social media constantly telling women how they should look, how they should parent, how to be perfect in a million different ways. The surveillance is constant.
That's a great way to put it. Do we still have powerful social structures that strip women of their individual identity just as effectively as the old laws did? Are women still primarily defined by their relationship, so-and-so's wife, so-and-so's mom, before they are ever defined by their own individual achievements or their own name?
It makes you realize that while the laws, the hardware, have changed for the better, the software, that deep cultural programming, is so much harder to rewrite.
I think Duygu Asena would say the fight isn't over. Not by a long shot. The name is there for the taking, but you still have to fight every single day to keep it.
I think you're absolutely right. It's a powerful reminder that progress isn't a straight line, and it's certainly not guaranteed. You have to keep telling this story.
And that ultimately is why we read. To remind ourselves of the battles that have been won, and to find the strength for the battles that are still left to fight.
That's all from us for now. If there are books you wish you could listen to a summary of, don't forget to write them in the comments. Maybe our next content will be the book you suggested. Stay healthy and happy.